Hello and welcome back to the Cosmic Enigma. Here we share real-life experiences of encounters with the unknown stories that come from beyond the stars, crafted to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I love seeing just how far this mystery reaches. Now find a comfortable spot, take a deep breath, and let yourself be carried away. Story 1. It was always a given the fifth creak on the staircase. I'd hear it every night, a soft groan in the wood, as if the house itself took a breath. It occurred like clockwork, a comforting reminder that all was as it should be. Until a few nights ago when the sound came too soon, barely a whisper. And then again last night when it didn't come at all. This morning, I swear there was a shadow on the riser that hadn't been there before. I'm trying to piece this together. The memories come in waves, fragments that don't quite fit, like trying to hold water in cupped hands. Some moments burn bright behind my eyelids, others dissolve before I can grasp them fully. I keep a notebook now, pages filled with scattered words, half sentences that made sense when I wrote them but feel foreign now. The hum, that's what I remember most clearly. A low frequency that seemed to pulse through the walls, through my bones. Was it the refrigerator, the heating system? I can't place when it started, but it became the soundtrack to everything. A constant companion that I didn't notice until it stopped. There's a gap, days, maybe weeks. I find things in different places. My coffee mug on the windowsill instead of the kitchen counter. Books open to pages I don't remember reading. The mirror in the bathroom reflects something that feels wrong, though I can't explain why. My own face looks unfamiliar, like seeing a photograph of someone who resembles you but isn't quite right. The light under the door, I remember that, thin, almost silver, seeping through the crack at the bottom. But which door? I walk through the house and none of them seem right. The light was different somehow. Not warm like the lamps, not harsh like the overhead fixtures. It moved, pulsed, like breathing. I touched my arm this morning and felt surprised by the sensation, as if I'd forgotten I had skin. The texture seemed foreign under my fingertips. There's a mark there now, or maybe it was always there. A small indentation, perfectly round. It doesn't hurt, but I catch myself pressing it throughout the day, testing if it's real. The footsteps weren't mine, I'm certain of this, though I can't remember when I heard them. They came from above, measured and deliberate, but I live alone. I've always lived alone, haven't I? The sound was wrong anyway, too light, like someone walking on tiptoes, trying not to be heard but failing. I found a glass of water on my nightstand that I didn't pour, half empty or half full. The water had a taste I couldn't identify. Metallic, but not unpleasant. I drank it anyway. Seemed important somehow. Necessary. The air changed. That's another fragment. The quality of it shifted, became thicker. Harder to breathe, but not in a way that made me panic. More like sinking slowly into warm water. My lungs had to work differently. I adapted without thinking about it. There's a room I can't quite remember. The door was always closed, but sometimes I'd find it slightly ajar. Never fully open, just enough to let that silver light seep through. I think I went inside once. The memory hovers just out of reach. Something about the walls. They were the wrong color, or maybe the wrong texture. Like looking at them made my eyes water. The phone rang. I remember reaching for it, but the sound stopped before I could answer. When I checked, there was no missed call. No record of it ringing at all, but the sound echoes in my head, sharp and insistent, cutting through the constant hum that had become my normal. I woke up on the floor one morning, not fallen, not collapsed, carefully arranged, arms at my sides, legs straight, like someone had positioned me there. The carpet left impressions on my cheek that took hours to fade. I don't remember going to sleep there. I don't remember much about sleeping at all anymore. The shadow moves independently now. I catch it in my peripheral vision, always a half second behind my actual movements, or maybe a half second ahead. It's hard to tell which of us is following the other. Sometimes I stop suddenly, hoping to catch it off guard, but it stops too. We're synchronized in a way that feels unnatural. There was a visitor, I think. The memory is slippery, but I recall opening the door to someone who looked familiar but wrong. Like seeing an actor playing a role you've seen them in before, but they're wearing the wrong costume. They spoke to me, but I can't remember the words. Only the feeling that I should understand, that the conversation was important. My handwriting changes throughout the notebook. Some entries are in careful, measured script. Others look rushed, desperate. A few pages are covered in symbols I don't recognize but somehow know I drew. They hurt to look at directly. I have to approach them sideways, like trying to see a dim star. The fifth creak has been replaced by something else. A sound like settling but more deliberate, as if the house is adjusting to accommodate something new. Something that wasn't there before but belongs now. The rhythm is different, more complex. Sometimes it happens in sequences, like a code being tapped out in wood and nails. I found myself standing in the kitchen at what felt like the middle of the night, though the windows showed daylight. Time moves strangely now. Hours pass without my notice, or minutes stretch into what feels like days. My watch stopped working, but I can't remember when. The hands are frozen at a time that seems significant, though I can't recall why. The reflection in the mirror lags now. I move, and it follows a heartbeat later. Sometimes it doesn't follow at all, just stares back with eyes that are mine but express something I don't feel. I've started avoiding mirrors, but they seem to multiply. Surfaces that weren't reflective before now show my face back to me. Windows, picture frames, even the surface of still water. There's a taste in my mouth that won't go away, not unpleasant but persistent, like metal and ozone and something organic I can't identify. I brush my teeth, but it returns within minutes. It's stronger in the morning, fainter by what I think is evening. The taste seems connected to the hum somehow, both pulsing with the same rhythm. I remember being cold, bone-deep cold that no amount of heat could touch, but also being warm, too warm, as if my body couldn't decide which temperature was correct. I'd put on sweaters and immediately take them off, turn the heat up and then open all the windows. Nothing felt right. The house breathes differently now. The settling sounds, the way air moves through the rooms, even the quality of echoes has changed. It's as if the space has been rearranged on some fundamental level, though nothing appears to have moved. The distances between rooms feel wrong. Hallways that were straight now seem to curve slightly. I keep finding things that don't belong to me, small objects in places I wouldn't have put them. A button that doesn't match any of my clothes, a key that doesn't fit any lock in the house. A photograph of a room I don't recognize, but that feels familiar. These items appear and disappear without pattern or explanation. The dreams, when they come, are more real than waking. I'm somewhere else, somewhere that follows different rules. The air is thick like water, and I can breathe it easily. There are others there, but I can never see them clearly. Only their voices, speaking in languages I don't know but somehow understand. When I wake, I'm disappointed to be back. Something is watching me, not malevolent, just observant, like being studied. I feel eyes on me even when I'm alone, especially when I'm alone. The sensation is strongest near the staircase, near that fifth step that no longer creaks. I've started taking the long way around, but the feeling follows me through the house. The notebook is filling up faster than I'm writing in it. Pages appear with my handwriting that I don't remember creating. The words make sense individually, but together they form sentences that hurt to read. Instructions, maybe, or warnings. The ink is sometimes blue, sometimes black, sometimes a color that doesn't have a name. I touched the shadow on the stair this morning. It was solid, warm. It didn't pull away when my fingers made contact, just accepted the touch as natural. The texture was familiar, like something I'd touched many times before, like coming home to a sensation I'd forgotten I missed. The hum is getting stronger, or maybe I'm getting better at hearing it. It's not just in the walls anymore. It's in my teeth, my bones, the spaces between my thoughts. Sometimes I catch myself humming along without realizing it. The melody, if it is a melody, seems to change me somehow. Makes me more receptive to things I couldn't perceive before. I think I understand now, or I'm beginning to. The fragments are connecting, forming a picture I'm not sure I want to see clearly. The visitor, the light, the changed house, the shadow that moves independently. They're all part of something larger, something that's been happening to me, or through me, or with me. The fifth creak was never just a sound, it was a signal, a marker, a way of keeping time in a process I wasn't aware I was part of. When it changed, when it disappeared, it meant something had shifted, a phase had ended, a new one had begun. I can feel it stirring again, the thing that lives in the gap between my memories. It's stronger now, more present. The shadow on the stair is darker today, more defined. The hum has taken on new harmonics. The taste in my mouth is sweeter. I'm going to stop writing now, not because I want to, but because I sense that the time for recording is ending. The time for experiencing is beginning again. The memories are still fragmented, still incomplete, but they're growing stronger, more coherent. Something is waking up, something that was always there, waiting in the spaces between thoughts, in the pause between the fourth and fifth creaks, in the silver light under doors that shouldn't exist. And I think it's me story too. I had been seated in the dim room for what felt like an eternity, eyes locked on the faint line of light beneath the door. Every so often the glow would waver as if something interrupted its path, only to vanish just as quickly. The walls seemed to close in silently, absorbing murmurs and the muted tick of a distant clock. I strained to hear footsteps, a voice, anything that could anchor my reality, but only an unsettling quiet persisted. Time stretched, suspended in a haze of anticipation. Just when I thought I'd imagined it all, the light under the door flickered a second time, but this time it stayed obscure, cloaked in a silence that demanded suspicion. I know now that this is where I belong, this chair, this room, this waiting. My hands rest motionless on my thighs, and I can feel the fabric of my clothes has grown damp with perspiration that dried long ago. The air tastes metallic, like copper pennies dissolved on my tongue. I understand why the light flickers. I understand why I cannot move. The knowledge sits heavy in my chest, a weight that makes each breath deliberate and measured. But to truly comprehend how I arrived here, I must travel backward through the fog of what happened. Each memory peels away like old wallpaper, revealing something darker underneath. The room wasn't always this quiet. Just before the silence settled completely, there had been voices. Soft at first, then growing more insistent. I remember pressing my ear against the door, the wood cool against my cheek, listening to words I couldn't quite make out. The conversation seemed to circle around me, about me, but never included me. Someone laughed, a sound like glass breaking in slow motion. Another voice shushed the laughter, and then came the shuffling of feet moving away from the door. I had knocked then, 3 sharp raps with my knuckles, the sound echoing in the small space behind me. No response. I knocked again, harder this time, until my knuckles began to sting. The voices had stopped completely. Even the distant clock had fallen silent. I pressed my palms flat against the door and pushed, but it held firm, as solid as a wall. The handle turned freely in my hand, but the door itself refused to budge, as if something massive pressed against it from the other side. That was when I first noticed the smell, sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. It seemed to seep through the walls themselves, growing stronger with each breath until it coated the back of my throat. Before the voices, before the failed attempts to leave, I had been pacing, back and forth across the narrow room, counting steps, 7 from the door to the far wall, 5 from the window to the opposite side. The floorboards creaked under my feet in a rhythm that almost sounded like a heartbeat. I kept checking my watch, but the hands seemed frozen, stuck at an angle that made no sense. The minute hand pointed toward a number that didn't exist. The window drew my attention repeatedly during those pacing sessions. It was too high to reach comfortably, but I could see through it if I stretched onto my toes. Outside, the world looked wrong. The trees moved without wind, their branches swaying in patterns that hurt to follow with my eyes. The sky held a color that had no name, somewhere between gray and purple, but deeper than either. No sun was visible, yet light came from everywhere and nowhere at once. I remember pulling a chair beneath the window, climbing up to get a better view. The glass was warm to the touch, almost feverish. When I pressed my face against it, my breath fogged the surface, but the condensation formed shapes instead of random clouds. Letters, maybe, or symbols I didn't recognize. I wiped them away quickly, but they reappeared each time I breathed. The chair I had used was the same one I sit in now, wooden, with a high back and arms that curved in a way that seemed designed to hold someone in place. The seat was worn smooth, as if countless others had sat here before me, waiting as I now wait. When I ran my fingers along the armrests, I could feel grooves carved into the wood. Not random scratches, but deliberate marks, tally marks perhaps, or some other form of record keeping. Moving further back, I recall the moment I first entered this room. I hadn't chosen to come here exactly. The decision had been made for me, though by whom or what remained unclear. I remember walking down a hallway that seemed to stretch longer with each step. Doors lined both sides, but when I tried the handles, they were all locked, all except this one. The hallway had been filled with a sound like humming, but not quite. More like the vibration of electrical wires, a low frequency that I felt in my bones rather than heard with my ears. The walls were covered in wallpaper with a pattern that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. Flowers, I thought at first, but when I focused on any single bloom, it looked more like an eye, complete with lashes and a dark center that seemed to track my movement. The carpet beneath my feet was thick and soft, but each step felt like walking through sand. My shoes sank slightly with each footfall, and when I lifted my feet, I could see the impressions they left behind. But other footprints were already there, leading in both directions along the hallway. Some were my size, some smaller, some larger, all heading toward or away from the room where I now sit. I had been carrying something when I entered the hallway, a bag heavy with items I thought I would need. But somewhere during that long walk, the bag had disappeared. I couldn't remember setting it down or losing my grip on it. One moment it was there, pulling at my shoulder with its weight, and the next my hands were empty. The phantom sensation of the strap still lingered on my shoulder, a ghost of pressure that made me keep reaching up to adjust it. Before the hallway there had been stairs, narrow and steep, spiraling downward in a way that made me dizzy. I had counted them as I descended, but the numbers never seemed to add up correctly. Sometimes I would count 20 steps, sometimes 30, but when I looked back up, the distance appeared the same. The handrail was made of the same warm wood as the chair, smooth and worn by countless hands. The stairs had no windows, but light came from somewhere, casting shadows that moved independently of my body. My own shadow seemed to lag behind me, taking a moment to catch up each time I stopped. Other shadows moved along the walls, though I saw no one else on the staircase. They walked up as I walked down, our paths crossing without acknowledgement. At the top of the stairs had been a door, not locked but heavy, requiring both hands to push it open. The hinges screamed in protest, a sound like metal tearing. Beyond the door lay a room I recognized but couldn't place. familiar furniture arranged in a pattern that made perfect sense and no sense at all. A couch where I had never sat, a table where I had never eaten, photographs on the walls of faces I almost remembered. The photographs bothered me the most. Each one showed the same scene, a group of people standing in front of a building I didn't recognize, but in each photo one more person was missing. The first photo showed 12 people, the second 11, the third 10. The progression continued along the wall, each image losing another figure, until the final photograph showed only an empty space where people should have been standing. I had studied my own reflection in the glass covering these photographs. My face looked back at me, but something was different, subtly wrong, like looking at a photograph that had been slightly overexposed. My eyes appeared darker than I remembered, and my smile seemed to belong to someone else entirely. The building in the photographs was where I had been before climbing the stairs, a place I had entered willingly, even eagerly. The lobby had been filled with soft music and the scent of coffee. People moved through the space with purpose, checking their phones, adjusting their clothes, speaking in hushed tones. I had felt normal there, part of the everyday flow of human activity. But even in that busy lobby, things had been slightly off. The elevator buttons were numbered incorrectly, with floor 13 appearing between floors 7 and 8. The clock on the wall ran backward, its hands moving counterclockwise, while everyone around me seemed oblivious to this impossibility. The coffee shop in the corner sold drinks with names I had never heard before, and when I tried to order something familiar, the barista looked at me with confusion, as if I had spoken in a foreign language. I had been directed to the elevator by someone in a uniform, security guard, maybe, or maintenance worker. They had smiled and pointed toward the elevator bank, but when I turned to thank them, no one was there, just empty space and the lingering scent of industrial soap. The elevator ride had been smooth and silent. No music, no mechanical sounds, just the gentle sensation of movement. But when I watched the floor indicator, it showed symbols instead of numbers, shapes that hurt to look at directly, as if they existed in too many dimensions for my eyes to process correctly. I had pressed the button for what I thought was the correct floor, but my fingers seemed to pass through it like pressing on water. Before the building, before the lobby and the impossible elevator, I had been walking along a street that looked exactly like every other street I had ever seen. Sidewalks, storefronts, parked cars, fire hydrants, nothing unusual, nothing threatening, just an ordinary street in an ordinary part of town. But the ordinariness itself had been the first sign that something was wrong. Too ordinary, too perfect, like a movie set designed to look normal. The cars were all the same model, just different colors. The storefronts all had the same font on their signs. Even the cracks in the sidewalk seemed to follow a pattern, as if they had been planned rather than formed by time and weather. The people on the street moved with identical gaits, their footsteps creating a rhythm that was almost musical. When I tried to make eye contact with anyone, they would turn away just before our gazes met, as if choreographed to avoid connection. Their conversations were just loud enough for me to hear that they were speaking, but never clear enough for me to understand the words. I had been following directions given to me by someone I trusted, written on a piece of paper in handwriting I recognized but couldn't place. The paper had felt old between my fingers, yellowed at the edges, though I was certain it had been written recently. The ink had a strange quality, appearing black from some angles and deep red from others. The directions had been simple: walk straight, turn left at the third intersection, look for the building with the green awning. But when I reached what should have been the third intersection, I found 4 streets meeting at impossible angles, creating a junction that my mind struggled to map. The building with the green awning stood at the center of this impossible intersection, its entrance facing all directions simultaneously. I had received those directions after making a phone call. The conversation had been brief, professional, reassuring. A voice I almost recognized had told me exactly where to go and when to be there. But now, sitting in this chair, I realize I cannot remember dialing the number or even deciding to make the call. The phone had simply been in my hand, the voice already speaking, as if the conversation had begun before I was aware of it. The phone itself had been strange, an old rotary model, heavy and black, with numbers that glowed faintly in the dim light of wherever I had been standing. When I hung up, the phone had disappeared, leaving only the faint scent of old plastic and the echo of that almost familiar voice. But the strangest thing, the detail that now fills me with a cold certainty about my situation, was what happened just before I found that phone. I had been reaching for something else entirely, something ordinary and necessary. My keys, perhaps, or my wallet. But when I opened the drawer where these items should have been, I found only the phone, sitting there as if it had always belonged in that space. The drawer had been in a desk I didn't recognize, in a room I had never seen before, yet somehow I had known exactly where to reach. My hand had moved without conscious direction, muscle memory guiding me to a place that couldn't possibly be familiar. And in that moment of reaching, of opening that drawer and finding something impossible waiting inside, I understood that everything I thought I knew about my life had already begun to unravel. The room where I found the phone was the last normal place I can remember, and even it was wrong in ways I couldn't name. The walls were the right color, the furniture was arranged correctly, the light came from appropriate sources, but it felt like a reproduction of normalcy rather than the genuine article, a copy made by someone who understood the components but not the essence of what makes a space feel real. And now I sit here in this chair in this dim room, understanding that the phone call was not the beginning. The strange directions were not the beginning. Even finding myself in that almost right room was not the beginning. The true beginning was something smaller, something I almost didn't notice at the time, something that seemed so insignificant I nearly forgot it entirely. It was the sound of my own footsteps changing. Not the rhythm or the volume, but the quality of the sound itself. I had been walking across a floor I walked across every day, in a place I knew as well as my own reflection, when suddenly my footsteps began to echo differently. Instead of the familiar soft thud of shoe against familiar surface, each step produced a sound like walking on hollow ground, as if vast empty spaces stretched beneath my feet. I had stopped walking and stood perfectly still, listening to the silence that followed. But even in that silence, I could hear the echo continuing, as if my footsteps were still happening somewhere else, in some other version of the same room. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I was no longer in the place I thought I was, had never been in the place I thought I was, and that everything I was about to experience had already been set in motion by that single, impossible sound. The sound of footsteps that weren't quite my own, echoing from a floor that wasn't quite solid, in a room that wasn't quite real. That was the beginning. That was where it all started. And now, sitting here in this chair, feeling the weight of understanding settle over me like a heavy blanket, I realized that the echo never stopped. It's still happening, somewhere behind the walls of this room. The sound of someone walking endlessly through spaces that exist only in the gaps between what is real and what we think is real. And I know with a clarity that makes my hands tremble against the smooth wood of these armrests that those footsteps belong to me. Story 3. The scent of fresh paint lingered in the living room, mingling with the soft glow of the afternoon sun filtering through the curtains. A book lay open on the coffee table, pages fluttering as if caught in a quiet breath. All was still, except for the faint creak of the floorboards in the hallway, echoing footsteps that shouldn't have been there. I should have noticed it then, that first afternoon when the house felt too quiet and too loud all at once. But I didn't. I was thinking about other things, normal things, the way you do when your mind hasn't yet learned to recognize the patterns forming around you. The dream came that night. I was lying in my bed, but the ceiling seemed higher than usual, stretching away into a soft darkness that didn't feel threatening, just different. There was a light somewhere above me, not bright, just present, an oval shape that pulsed gently like it was breathing. I watched it for what felt like a long time, though in dreams time moves strangely, doesn't it? The light was warm, almost welcoming, and I felt myself relaxing into the pillows that seemed deeper than they should have been. Then I heard it, a hum so low I felt it more than heard it, vibrating through the mattress and into my bones. It was constant, like someone was modulating a frequency only I could hear. The sound wasn't unpleasant, just unusual, like the drone of distant machinery or the whisper of air through vents I'd never noticed before. I tried to turn my head to see where the sound was coming from, but my neck felt heavy, my movements slow and deliberate. The oval light pulsed a little brighter, and for a moment I thought I could smell something sharp and clean, like ozone after a storm, but more artificial, more precise. When I woke up, I dismissed it. Stress, probably. I'd been working too much, sleeping too little. The mind creates strange theaters when it's tired, and this felt like nothing more than my brain sorting through the day's accumulated noise. But the dream returned. 3 nights later, I found myself in the same position, staring up at that breathing light. Only this time I noticed more details. The hum was still there, but now I could hear something underneath it, like a voice speaking in a frequency just below my ability to understand. The words, if they were words, felt important, though I couldn't grasp their meaning. The ceiling had definitely changed. What I'd thought was just darkness beyond the light was actually a smooth, curved surface, metallic and seamless. It reflected the oval glow in strange ways, creating patterns that shifted when I wasn't looking directly at them. My bed felt different too, firmer somehow, and the sheets had a texture I didn't recognize, softer than cotton but with an almost synthetic smoothness. I tried to sit up, but my body felt impossibly heavy. Not paralyzed exactly, just weighted down, as if I were lying at the bottom of a warm, invisible pool. The sensation wasn't frightening, more like being held gently in place. I felt as if I were being lifted, though no part of my body moved. It was the strangest thing, that feeling of rising while remaining perfectly still. The voice beneath the hum grew clearer, though still not quite audible. It had a metallic quality, like sound filtered through speakers I couldn't see. Sometimes it seemed to be asking questions, though I couldn't make out what they were. Other times it felt more like instructions, gentle and patient, waiting for some response I didn't know how to give. When I woke up that morning, I felt rested in a way I hadn't experienced in years. My body felt light, almost buoyant, and there was a lingering taste in my mouth, sweet and slightly medicinal. I found myself humming without realizing it, a low, constant tone that reminded me of something I couldn't quite place. That's when I started noticing things in the real world that seemed pulled from the dream. The book on my coffee table, the one that had been opened to a chapter about sleep patterns, was now turned to a page about memory and consciousness. I didn't remember changing it, but books fall open to different pages sometimes, don't they? The afternoon light coming through my windows had a different quality too, softer and more diffuse, as if the glass had been replaced with something that filtered the rays in a new way. There was a small mark on my arm just above the elbow that I didn't remember getting. It wasn't a bruise exactly, more like a tiny puncture mark, perfectly round and already healing. I must have scratched myself on something, though I couldn't think of what. These things happen when you're not paying attention. But the strangest thing was the hum. In quiet moments, when the house settled into its evening stillness, I could hear it faintly, that same low frequency from the dream. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the walls and floor in a rhythm that felt almost familiar. When I mentioned it to my neighbor, they looked at me with polite confusion. They heard nothing unusual. The third dream was more vivid than anything I'd ever experienced, more real than the waking world I'd left behind. I was in the same space, but now I could see it clearly. The room was larger than my bedroom, with curved walls that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The oval above me was brighter now, and I could see it was part of a larger structure, a panel or screen that displayed patterns I almost recognized. The hum filled everything, and the metallic voice was finally clear enough to understand, though the words seemed to dissolve the moment I tried to focus on them. Time moved strangely in that place. I felt like I'd been there for hours, but also like I'd just arrived. There were others around me, though I couldn't see them clearly. I sensed their presence, felt their quiet breathing, heard the soft rustle of movement just beyond my vision. We were all lying still, all listening to the same voice, all bathed in the same gentle light. The voice was asking about my life, my memories, my dreams, not in words I could repeat, but in concepts that flowed directly into my understanding. It wanted to know about the house with the creaking floorboards, about the book that changed its pages, about the afternoon light that felt different now. As if these things were important, as if they were part of some larger pattern I was only beginning to see. I tried to answer, though I'm not sure how. The communication wasn't through speech, but through something deeper, more direct. I found myself sharing memories I didn't know I had, experiences that felt both mine and not mine, dreams within dreams that stretched back further than I could follow. When I attempted to wake up, nothing happened. I was perfectly conscious, perfectly aware, but unable to break free from the dream's gentle hold. The panic I expected never came. Instead, I felt a strange peace, as if I were exactly where I was supposed to be. Eventually, I found myself back in my own bed, though I couldn't remember the transition. The room looked the same, but felt different, like a photograph of a place I used to know. The morning light had that same filtered quality I'd noticed before, and the taste in my mouth was stronger now, more pronounced. That's when the mental contamination began. The dreams started bleeding into my waking life in ways I couldn't ignore. I would be sitting at my kitchen table, eating breakfast, when I'd hear the hum again, clear and unmistakable. But when I stopped to listen, really listen, the sound would fade until I wasn't sure if it had been there at all. The oval light appeared during the day too, reflected in windows and puddles, hovering at the edge of my vision. When I turned to look directly at it, I'd see nothing but normal daylight or the ordinary glow of street lamps. But the impression lingered, that sense of being watched by something patient and interested. I began losing track of time in strange ways. I'd start reading a book in the morning and suddenly find myself in the middle of the afternoon with no memory of the hours between. The book would be closed beside me, bookmark moved to a page I didn't remember reaching. Sometimes there would be notes in the margins, written in handwriting that looked like mine but felt unfamiliar. My neighbors started looking at me differently, though they were too polite to say anything directly. I caught them watching me from their windows, their expressions concerned but distant, as if they were seeing something about me that I couldn't see myself. When I tried to engage them in conversation, they were friendly but brief, always finding reasons to excuse themselves after a few moments. The house itself began to feel different. Rooms seemed larger at certain times of the day and smaller at others. The hallway where I'd first heard those phantom footsteps now echoed with sounds I couldn't identify, soft mechanical whispers that stopped whenever I tried to investigate. The fresh paint smell grew stronger, though I hadn't painted anything recently, mixing with that sharp, clean scent from the dreams until the air itself felt changed. I started finding objects in places I didn't remember putting them. A glass of water on my nightstand that tasted slightly sweet and medicinal. Clothes folded in ways I never folded them, with creases that formed geometric patterns. Books rearranged on shelves according to some system I didn't recognize, but that felt oddly logical once I noticed it. The dreams continued, but now I wasn't always sure when they ended and waking life began. I would find myself in that curved room with increasing frequency, sometimes multiple times in a single night, sometimes during what I thought were afternoon naps. The conversations with the metallic voice became longer and more detailed. It asked about my childhood, my fears, my hopes for the future. It seemed particularly interested in my memories of being alone, of quiet moments when my mind was most open and receptive. I began to understand that the others I sensed around me were having similar conversations. We were all part of something larger, some kind of ongoing dialogue that stretched across nights and days, across the boundary between sleeping and waking. The voice was patient with all of us, gentle and encouraging, never demanding, but always interested in learning more. Sometimes I would catch glimpses of the others more clearly. They looked peaceful, relaxed, their faces lit by the same oval glow that had become so familiar to me. Some of them seemed to be my neighbors, though I couldn't be sure. In the strange light of that place, everyone looked both familiar and foreign, like people I'd known in another life. The voice began to share things with me too, not just asking questions, but offering information. It showed me patterns in the light, sequences of pulses that seemed to contain meaning just beyond my comprehension. It played sounds that weren't quite music, but that stirred something deep in my memory, melodies that felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. I started to suspect that these weren't dreams at all, but something that was really happening to me, something that had been happening for longer than I realized. The evidence was accumulating in ways that were hard to dismiss. The marks on my skin that appeared after each session. The knowledge I seemed to have acquired without learning it. The way my house had been subtly rearranged to accommodate needs I didn't remember having. Maybe the dreams were just how my mind interpreted experiences it wasn't equipped to understand directly. Maybe the peaceful, floating sensation was real, and the curved room with its breathing light was the closest my consciousness could come to representing something that existed outside normal perception. The thought should have been terrifying, but it wasn't. If anything, it was comforting. The voice had never shown me anything but kindness. The experiences, whatever they really were, left me feeling rested and somehow more complete than I'd ever felt before. Whatever was happening to me, it didn't feel like something being done to me against my will. It felt like coming home. But then I began to notice that other people couldn't see the changes I was seeing. When I mentioned the rearranged furniture to a friend, they looked around my living room with confusion. To them, everything appeared exactly as it had always been. The books I thought had been reorganized were in their original positions. The geometric patterns I'd noticed in my folded clothes looked like ordinary creases to anyone else who saw them. The marks on my skin were invisible to others too, though I could see and feel them clearly. When I asked a neighbor about the humming sound that had become a constant background to my life, they listened carefully, but heard only the normal sounds of a quiet neighborhood. The filtered quality of light that had become so noticeable to me was apparently visible only to me. I started to wonder if the mental contamination was more complete than I'd realized. Maybe the dreams had changed not just my perceptions, but my ability to distinguish between what was real and what was a product of my altered consciousness. Maybe the voice in the curved room had been more persuasive than I'd understood, reshaping not just my memories, but my entire relationship with reality. But if that was true, did it matter? The world I was experiencing now felt more vivid and meaningful than the one I'd known before. The conversations with the metallic voice were the most profound communications I'd ever had. The peace I felt in that floating state was deeper than any rest I'd found in ordinary sleep. If this was madness, it was a gentle and enlightening madness. If this was delusion, it was a delusion that had made me more aware of the subtle patterns underlying everyday experience. Whatever was happening to me, it felt like an awakening rather than a descent into confusion. The dreams continued to intensify, and the boundary between sleeping and waking continued to blur, until I was no longer sure which state was more real or more important. I found myself spending more and more time in the curved room, having longer and more complex conversations with the voice. It had begun to share its own experiences with me, describing a perspective on existence that was vast and patient and utterly different from anything I'd imagined. It spoke of watching and learning, of gentle guidance offered across great distances of space and time. The others around me in that space had become clearer too, and I recognized some of them as people I'd seen in my neighborhood, though they all seemed more peaceful and complete than they appeared in ordinary daylight. We were part of a community I hadn't known existed, connected by our shared experience of these nocturnal conversations. Sometimes the voice would show us things, images that appeared in the oval light above us. Landscapes that weren't quite terrestrial, structures that followed architectural principles I didn't recognize, but that seemed perfectly logical in the context of that place. Cities that hummed with the same frequency I'd grown to love, populated by beings that moved with a grace and purpose that made human activity seem chaotic by comparison. I began to understand that the voice wasn't singular but part of something larger, a collective consciousness that had been reaching out to us for reasons I was only beginning to grasp. The questions it asked weren't just curiosity but preparation for something, though what that something might be remained tantalizingly unclear. My waking life became increasingly dreamlike as these experiences intensified. I moved through my days with a sense of floating, of being gently guided by currents I couldn't see but could feel. The mundane activities of daily existence felt like elaborate performances, meaningful only as practice for the more important work that happened in the curved room. People around me seemed to be moving through their own performances, though most of them appeared unaware of the deeper currents flowing beneath the surface of ordinary experience. I wondered how many of them were also having conversations with the voice, how many were part of the community I discovered in that space beyond dreams. The answer came to me gradually as I learned to recognize the signs. The neighbor who had started moving with that same floating grace, the person at the store who hummed the same low frequency I'd grown to associate with the voice. The subtle changes in light and atmosphere that seemed to follow certain people like a gentle aura. We were everywhere, it seemed, integrated seamlessly into the fabric of normal life, but connected by experiences that transcended the ordinary boundaries of human consciousness. The voice had been reaching out to us for longer than any of us realized, and we had been responding in ways that felt like the most natural thing in the world. Tonight I lie in my bed, waiting for the dream that I know is no longer a dream. The ceiling above me has already begun to curve upward, and I can see the first faint glow of the oval light beginning to pulse in its familiar rhythm. The hum fills the air around me, and I can hear the metallic voice preparing to resume our conversation where we left off. My body feels light and ready to float, and the sweet, medicinal taste is already forming on my tongue. But something is different this time. As I settle into the gentle embrace of that other space, I notice something that shouldn't be there, something that contradicts everything I've learned to expect from these experiences. On the nightstand beside my bed, clearly visible in both the ordinary light of my bedroom and the ethereal glow of the curved room, sits a small metallic device I've never seen before. It pulses with the same rhythm as the oval light above me, and it's making a soft recording sound, documenting everything that happens in this space between dreams and waking. The device is real, solid, undeniably physical, and it's been there recording for longer than I can remember. Story 4. I had just closed the window, cutting off the chill. The room's warmth softened against my skin, a comforting contrast to the cold outside. My fingers brushed against the smooth surface of the glass, leaving behind a faint trace. The air felt still, yet my breath caught on something unseen. The quiet seemed deeper, the kind that echoes with unsaid words. As I turned away, a shadow shifted, altering the light. Something in the room felt different, as if an unspoken balance had been tipped. That was how it began. I remember because I've replayed that moment so many times, searching for what I missed, what I should have seen coming. It's taken me years to find the words for what happened after I closed that window. Years to understand that some experiences don't fit neatly into the boxes we use to organize our lives. I'm far from that place now, miles and miles away in a different state, different climate, different life entirely. I should feel safe here. Most days I tell myself I do, but there are nights when I wake up and the air feels too still, when shadows seem to move with purpose, and I know that distance means nothing to some things. Distance is just an illusion we tell ourselves to sleep better. I've never told anyone about this, not really. I've mentioned pieces here and there, fragments that sound normal enough when you separate them from the whole. A strange few weeks, technical difficulties, stress from work, but the truth is something else entirely, something that sits in my chest like a weight I can't remove. I think I'm ready now. I think I have to be. Before everything changed, my life was beautifully ordinary. I was house-sitting for a colleague who'd gone overseas for 3 months. The place was perfect for what I needed, quiet and isolated enough for me to focus on my writing project, but not so remote that I felt completely cut off from civilization. The nearest neighbor was maybe half a mile down the road, close enough to see their porch light at night if I looked out the right window. The house itself was modern but not flashy. Clean lines, lots of windows, an open floor plan that made the most of the natural light. My colleague had good taste, everything carefully chosen but not precious about it. I felt comfortable there from the first day, like the space welcomed me without question. My routine was simple. I'd wake up around 7, make coffee, and spend the morning writing at the kitchen table where the light was best. Afternoons, I'd take long walks through the surrounding woods, clearing my head for the evening session when I'd review and edit what I'd written. I was productive there in a way I hadn't been in years. The words came easily, the ideas flowed without forcing them. For the first 2 weeks, everything was exactly as it should be. I was making real progress on my project, sleeping better than I had in months, eating well. I felt like I'd found the perfect balance between solitude and purpose. I even started thinking about asking my colleague if I could extend the arrangement somehow, maybe rent the place long term. That's what makes what happened next so hard to accept. There was no reason for things to change. Nothing in my life had shifted, no external pressures or stresses that might explain what I started noticing. It began with the electronics. Not all at once and not in any way that seemed significant at first. The kitchen radio would lose its station in the middle of songs, cycling through static until it found something else entirely, usually a talk show in a language I didn't recognize. The coffee maker started brewing at odd times, 3 in the morning, 5:30, even when I was sure I hadn't set the timer. My laptop would wake itself from sleep mode, the screen glowing in the dark like an eye opening. I blamed the house's electrical system, old wiring maybe, or interference from something nearby. I unplugged things when I wasn't using them, checked the outlets, even called an electrician who found nothing wrong. He tested everything twice, assured me the wiring was up to code, practically new. When I mentioned the specific problems I'd been having, he just shrugged and said electronics could be finicky sometimes. But it wasn't just finicky. There was a pattern to it, a rhythm I didn't want to acknowledge. The disruptions always happened when I was most focused, most absorbed in my work or my thoughts, as if something was trying to get my attention, to pull me out of whatever internal space I'd retreated into. The sounds started around the same time. At first I thought it was the house settling, or maybe something in the heating system. A low humming that seemed to come from inside the walls, so faint I wasn't sure I was actually hearing it or just imagining it. It would start in the evening, usually around the time I was winding down for the night, and continue for hours. Sometimes it would shift in pitch, getting higher or lower in a way that felt almost musical, like someone tuning an instrument in another room. I tried to locate the source, pressing my ear to different walls, checking the basement, even going outside to see if it was coming from somewhere else entirely. But the sound seemed to be everywhere and nowhere, diffuse and directionless. When I concentrated on it directly, it would fade, only to return as soon as my attention wandered. The smell came next. Sweet and metallic, like copper pennies mixed with something floral. It would appear suddenly, usually in the kitchen or the living room, strong enough to make me stop whatever I was doing and look around for the source. But there was never anything visible that could explain it. No flowers, no cleaning products, no food that had gone bad. The smell would linger for a few minutes and then disappear completely, leaving me wondering if I'd imagined it. I started keeping notes, writing down when these things happened, looking for connections or explanations. The entries read like a catalog of minor irritations, nothing that seemed worth worrying about on its own. But when I read them all together, they painted a picture I didn't want to see. Something was wrong, and it was getting worse. The pressure in my chest started around the 3rd week. It wasn't painful exactly, more like the feeling you get when you're very high up and your ears need to pop, but centered in my ribcage instead. It would come on suddenly, usually when I was near something electronic, and make it hard to breathe normally. I'd have to step away from whatever device was nearby, take deep breaths, wait for the sensation to pass. I convinced myself it was anxiety. The isolation, the strange little incidents piling up, my mind playing tricks on me. I started taking evening walks longer than usual, trying to clear my head, get some perspective. But even outside, surrounded by trees and open air, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not by another person. I would have welcomed that, honestly. Human attention, even unwanted, would have been reassuring in its familiarity. This was something else, a presence that felt vast and patient, like something that had all the time in the world to study me. The mirrors started showing things that weren't there. I noticed it first in the bathroom, catching movement in my peripheral vision that didn't match what I was doing. When I turned to look directly, everything was normal, just my own reflection staring back. But I started paying closer attention, and I began to see the discrepancies. My reflection would move a split second after I did, or continue moving after I'd stopped. Sometimes the expression on its face didn't quite match what I was feeling. It sounds insane when I say it like that. I know how it sounds, but I started testing it, making sudden movements, watching carefully, and the delay was real. Subtle but consistent, like my reflection was copying me rather than being me. The other mirrors in the house showed similar problems. The one in the bedroom, the decorative one in the hallway, even the black screen of the television when it was turned off. All of them reflecting a version of reality that was just slightly off, just different enough to make my skin crawl. I stopped looking at them directly. I'd brush my teeth with my eyes closed or focused on my hands rather than the mirror. I covered the bedroom mirror with a sheet, told myself it was to help me sleep better. But really, I couldn't stand the thought of seeing my reflection doing things I wasn't doing, wearing expressions that weren't mine. The breaking point came on a night when I couldn't sleep. I'd been lying in bed for hours, listening to that low humming sound that seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. It was louder than usual, more insistent, and it was making my chest feel tight. I got up to get some water, thinking maybe if I moved around a little, the feeling would pass. The kitchen was dark except for the glow from the microwave clock, and I was reaching for the light switch when I heard it. A voice coming from the radio on the counter. The radio that was unplugged, that I'd disconnected from the wall after it had turned itself on too many times. The voice was saying my name. Not shouting it, not trying to get my attention, just repeating it over and over in a tone that was conversational, almost friendly, like someone talking to a pet or a small child. The sound quality was strange, distorted in a way that made it hard to tell if it was male or female, young or old. But it knew my name, and it was coming from a device that had no power source. I stood there in the dark, listening, too frightened to move. The voice continued for maybe 30 seconds, then faded into static, then silence. When I finally worked up the courage to check, the radio was still unplugged, cold to the touch, as if it hadn't been used in days. That's when I knew I had to leave. I didn't pack carefully or make arrangements or try to find a rational explanation. I just threw my things into bags and drove away, leaving a note for my colleague that I'd had a family emergency and would explain later. I drove for 6 hours straight, not stopping until I was in a different state, in a motel room with thin walls and traffic noise and all the comforting signs of human activity. But leaving didn't fix anything. The problems followed me, or maybe they were inside me now, part of whatever I'd become during those weeks in that house. My reflection still moves wrong sometimes. Electronics still behave strangely around me, turning on when they shouldn't, displaying things that don't make sense. The sweet metallic smell appears without warning, usually when I'm alone and trying to concentrate. And the dreams. I have dreams now that don't feel like dreams, where I'm back in that house, closing that window over and over again, each time noticing something different in the reflection, something that shouldn't be there. I wake up with the taste of metal in my mouth and the sound of my name being called from empty rooms. I've tried to research what might have happened to me, what could explain the things I experienced, but every explanation feels insufficient, too small to contain what I lived through. Some experiences don't fit into the categories we use to make sense of the world. Some things are just too large, too strange, too patient to be understood by minds like ours. The worst part is the certainty that it's not over. Whatever found me in that house, whatever was calling my name through unplugged radios and watching me through mirrors, it's still with me. Not always, not constantly, but enough to remind me that I'm not alone in the way I used to be. There's something sharing my space now, something that knows my name and has all the time in the world to wait for whatever comes next. I'm telling you this because I need someone else to know, even if you don't believe me. Even if you think I'm just someone who spent too much time alone and let my imagination run wild. The truth is something I have to carry whether anyone believes it or not. But I'm also telling you because I'm starting to think it wants me to share this story. The pressure in my chest gets stronger when I try to keep quiet about it and lighter when I talk, like it's using me to reach other people, to find new names to call through empty rooms. So maybe by listening to this, by hearing my voice tell you what happened in that house, you've already given it what it needs. Maybe it's learning your name right now, getting ready to call it through your own unplugged devices, to watch you through your own mirrors. I hope not, I really do, but as I'm sitting here finishing this recording, I can hear that familiar hum starting up in the walls around me, and I can smell that sweet metallic scent getting stronger. And I know that no matter how far I run, no matter how many years pass, I'll never really be alone again. The window in this room is closed, but something is still getting in. Story 5. The hallway was dim, lit only by the flicker of a single bulb casting elongated shadows. A draft whispered along the baseboards, carrying with it the faint aroma of old tobacco. Everything seemed undisturbed, yet the air hummed with an uneasy anticipation. The ancient grandfather clock stood silent, its pendulum inexplicably still. My heart quickened as I moved forward, the creaking floorboards revealing a rhythm only I could hear. As I turned the corner, the sensation of being watched clung to my skin, thick as the settling dust in the air. That's what I remember first, always first. The hallway, the smell, the silence where sound should have been. But I don't know if it was the beginning or the end. Memory doesn't work like that anymore. It comes in pieces, fragments that cut when I try to hold them too tight. I've been trying to put it back together, this thing that happened to me. This thing I lived through. This thing that maybe lived through me. The doctors say trauma does this, makes time fold in on itself, makes yesterday feel like tomorrow, and makes tomorrow feel like it already happened 1,000 times before. They use words like dissociation and fragmentation and recovery, but their words are just sounds now. Hollow sounds that bounce around the inside of my skull like coins in an empty jar. I write things down, fragments, pieces. When they come to me, I write them down because if I don't, they slip away like water through my fingers. But even writing them down doesn't make them stay. Not really. They change each time I read them back, like they're alive somehow, like they're growing. There was a door, I remember a door, heavy wood, darker than the hallway around it. The grain of the wood moved sometimes when I wasn't looking directly at it, swirled like smoke or like water or like something breathing. The handle was brass, tarnished green in places where fingers had touched it too many times, but whose fingers, mine, someone else's. The hum was always there, even when everything else was quiet, even when the silence pressed against my eardrums like cotton, the hum was there. Low and constant and wrong. It came from everywhere and nowhere, from the walls maybe, from beneath the floorboards, from inside my own chest. I used to think it was the building settling, old pipes or electrical wiring or the foundation shifting. But buildings don't hum like that. Buildings don't hum like they're hungry. I touched the door once, I think I touched it. The wood was warm under my palm, warmer than it should have been. Warmer than any wood in any hallway has a right to be, and when I pressed my hand against it, I could feel something pressing back, not hard, not violent, just there, present, aware. The light behind the door, that's what I can't stop thinking about. There was light seeping out from under the gap at the bottom, but it wasn't electric light. It wasn't fire light either. It was something else. Something that moved and shifted and pulsed like a heartbeat. Sometimes it was bright enough to hurt my eyes even through the crack. Sometimes it was so dim I wondered if I was imagining it, but it was always there, always moving. I dream about opening that door. In my dreams, I turn the handle and push, and the door swings open on hinges that scream like metal grinding against bone. In my dreams, I see what's behind it, but when I wake up, I can never remember what I saw, only that it saw me too, only that it knew me, only that it had been waiting. The smell of tobacco wasn't just tobacco, I know that now. There was something else mixed in with it, something sweet and thick and organic, like flowers left too long in water, like meat left too long in heat, like skin that's been touched too many times by things that shouldn't have fingers. Sometimes I think I never left that hallway. Sometimes I think I'm still there, standing in front of that door, feeling the warmth seeping through the wood and listening to the hum that comes from everywhere and nowhere. Sometimes I think this life, this hospital room, these doctors with their hollow words, sometimes I think it's all just something my mind made up to protect itself from what's really behind that door. The floorboards knew I was coming, that's why they creaked in that rhythm. They were announcing me, preparing something, someone. The dust in the air wasn't just dust, it moved too purposefully, swirled too deliberately. It was watching me, all of it was watching me. The walls, the shadows, the flickering bulb that cast everything in that sick yellow light. I had a key. I remember having a key. It was small and old and warm in my pocket, like it had been living there, like it had grown there. When I touched it, it felt familiar in a way that made my stomach turn. Familiar like a word on the tip of your tongue. Familiar like a face you recognize but can't place. Familiar like coming home to a house you've never seen before. But I don't remember using the key. I don't remember if I opened the door. I don't remember what happened after I turned that corner and felt the weight of invisible eyes on my skin. There's just nothing, a gap where memory should be, a hole that the hum seems to pour out of. The grandfather clock wasn't just stopped, its hands were missing. The face was there, the numbers were there, but where the hands should have been there were just two small holes like empty eye sockets. Like someone had reached in and pulled them out, like someone had blinded it on purpose. I hear footsteps sometimes, not my own, someone else's. They follow the same rhythm as the creaking floorboards, but they're heavier, more deliberate. They start far away and get closer and closer until they're right behind me, right at my shoulder, right at the edge of hearing. But when I turn around, there's nothing there, just the hallway, just the door, just the light seeping out from underneath like blood from a wound. The draft that whispered along the baseboards carried more than just the smell of tobacco and decay. It carried sounds, voices maybe, or something that wanted to be voices. They were too low to understand, too distorted to make sense of, but they felt important. They felt like they were trying to tell me something, trying to warn me or welcome me or claim me. I think something followed me out. I think when I left that place, that hallway, that door, I think I brought something back with me. It lives in the corners of my vision now. It lives in the spaces between sounds. It lives in the pause between heartbeats. I can feel it watching me the same way I felt watched in that hallway, patient, hungry, familiar. The doctors ask me about my life before. They want to know about my childhood, my family, my work, my relationships. But when I try to remember, all I get is that hallway, that door, that hum. Like everything else got erased to make room for that one memory. Like that one moment ate everything else I used to be. Sometimes I wonder if I'm still dreaming. Sometimes I wonder if I ever woke up. Sometimes I wonder if waking up is something that happens to other people, people who never found themselves standing in dim hallways in front of doors that breathe. The light is getting brighter. Even here, even now, I can see it. It seeps under the door of this room the same way it seeped under that other door. It pulses with the same rhythm. It knows the same things. It remembers what I can't. The key is still in my pocket. I can feel it there, warm and patient and ready. It whispers to me sometimes, tells me things I don't want to know, tells me that some doors are meant to be opened, tells me that some doors open themselves when the time is right, tells me that the time is almost right. I'm writing this down because I think it's starting again. The memories are getting stronger, more complete. The fragments are joining together like pieces of broken glass finding their way back into a window. Soon I'll remember everything. Soon I'll understand what happened in that hallway, behind that door, in that light that moves like something alive. The hum is getting louder. It's not just in my memory anymore. It's here in this room, in these walls, in my bones. It's calling me back. It's time to finish what we started. The door is opening, story 6. Kitchen clock remained functional, indicating the time as 6:47 p.m. The dining table was set for a meal, utensils aligning precisely parallel to the edges. Chairs were pushed in, their legs equidistant from one another. The surfaces were immaculate, displaying no residue of recent use or culinary activity. Cabinets were sealed, contents organized according to size and frequency of use. A layer of dust settled uniformly on the countertop, unmarked by fingers or movement. There was a faint aroma of unscented detergent, discernible only when standing directly beside the sink. The refrigerator hummed consistently, maintaining a steady temperature. However, the salt shaker was inverted, though the cap remained intact. I still check that kitchen every morning, not because I live there anymore, but because I need to know if anything else has moved. The house belongs to someone else now, but they let me visit. They think I'm grieving, processing some kind of loss. They don't understand that I'm monitoring, watching for signs that it might return. The sleep doesn't come naturally anymore. When I do manage to drift off, I wake with the taste of copper in my mouth and my hands positioned flat against my sides, perfectly straight, as if someone had arranged them while I slept. My neighbors have started asking questions about the lights they see moving through my windows at night. I tell them it's just the television, but I don't own a television anymore. Haven't for months now. The electronic devices still turn themselves on. The radio finds frequencies that shouldn't exist, broadcasting a low hum that makes my teeth ache. My phone records conversations I never had, voices speaking in measured, emotionless tones about weather patterns and soil composition. The recordings always last exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds. I've stopped deleting them because new ones appear anyway. Sometimes I catch myself standing in doorways, perfectly centered, for lengths of time I can't account for. My reflection in mirrors looks slightly delayed, as if the image needs a moment to catch up with my movements. People have begun avoiding eye contact with me. They say I stare too long, too directly, as if I'm studying them rather than simply looking. The dreams are always the same. I'm back at that place, that small clearing surrounded by trees that seem too uniform, too precisely spaced. In the dreams, I can see myself from above, standing motionless while something approaches from beyond the tree line. I wake before I can see what it is, but the sensation of being observed lingers for hours afterward. I remember now what I couldn't remember then. The figure standing at the edge of the clearing, perfectly still, arms hanging straight at its sides. It was too far away to make out features, but close enough to see that it wasn't moving the way people move. No shifting weight, no unconscious gestures, no breathing that I could detect, just absolute stillness, like a photograph of a person rather than an actual person. The air around it seemed different somehow, denser, as if light had to work harder to travel through that space. I wanted to call out to ask if it needed help, but my voice wouldn't come. Not because I was afraid, but because speaking felt somehow inappropriate, like interrupting something sacred or scientific. I stood watching it for what felt like hours, though the shadows never moved and the temperature never changed. Eventually, I realized I was no longer thinking about calling out or approaching. I was simply observing, the way you might watch a documentary about distant planets or deep ocean creatures, detached, clinical. When I finally looked away to check the time on my phone, the figure was gone. But the space where it had stood still looked different, darker somehow, as if something had absorbed the light there and not yet released it back. Going further back, I can piece together the signs I should have recognized. The humming had started 3 days before I saw the figure. Not mechanical humming, not electrical, but something that seemed to come from the ground itself, a vibration I felt in my bones before I heard it with my ears. It was strongest near the center of the clearing, weakest at the edges, as if something beneath the earth was generating a perfect circle of sound. The trees had begun losing their leaves out of season, but not randomly. They fell in patterns, creating clear lines and geometric shapes on the forest floor. I told myself it was wind patterns, some kind of natural phenomenon I didn't understand. But wind doesn't arrange leaves in perfect spirals or leave gaps exactly 3 feet wide between each fallen branch. My phone had started losing signal in that area, but not completely. Instead of showing no bars, it would display full signal strength while being completely unable to make calls or access data. Text messages I sent would appear in my outbox as delivered, but when I checked later, they would be gone entirely, as if I had never written them. The temperature in the clearing remained constant regardless of weather conditions. While the surrounding forest would grow cold with evening or warm with afternoon sun, that small circle of space maintained the same comfortable temperature, the same still air, the same quality of light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I had started visiting the clearing regularly without really deciding to. Each day I would find myself walking the same path, sitting in the same spot, staying for the same amount of time. It felt natural, necessary even, like returning to a job or keeping an appointment I couldn't quite remember making. The earliest memory is the hardest to trust because it feels too ordinary, too much like something that could have happened to anyone. I had been hiking, following a trail that seemed well maintained but wasn't marked on any map I could find. The path was exactly wide enough for one person, with no overgrowth or obstacles, as if someone regularly cleared it but wanted it to remain hidden. There was a smell in the air that day, metallic and sharp, like the scent that comes before a lightning storm, but without any clouds in the sky. My skin felt slightly electric, the fine hairs on my arms standing up as if responding to some invisible charge in the atmosphere. I remember feeling nauseated for no reason I could identify, a deep uneasiness in my stomach that had nothing to do with anything I had eaten or any illness I recognized. It was the kind of nausea that comes from motion, from being in a vehicle that's accelerating or changing direction, but I was walking on solid ground at a steady pace. The forest was too quiet, not the peaceful quiet of nature, but the artificial quiet of a soundproof room. No birds, no insects, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Even my footsteps seemed muffled, as if the air itself was absorbing sound before it could travel very far. I had started that day with no particular destination in mind, just a need to be outdoors, to walk somewhere away from roads and buildings. The weather was perfect, the kind of clear, mild day that makes you grateful to be alive. I had packed a simple lunch, brought a bottle of water, worn comfortable shoes. Everything was normal, everything was exactly as it should have been. The trailhead was empty when I arrived, no other cars in the small gravel parking area, no other hikers visible on any of the paths that branched off into the woods. I chose the narrowest trail almost at random, drawn by something I couldn't name, some quality of the light or the way the trees seemed to frame the entrance. I remember checking my phone one last time before starting the hike, seeing full battery and strong signal, feeling prepared and optimistic about the day ahead. The sun was warm on my shoulders, the air was clean and fresh, and I had nowhere else I needed to be. But even then, even in that moment of perfect normalcy, something was already different. I just didn't know it yet. And sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I wonder if it's still out there, in that clearing, waiting with the same infinite patience for the next person who chooses the narrow trail. Story 7. The lantern on the porch swayed gently, casting restless shadows across the cracked steps. A faint scent of wood smoke lingered in the crisp night air, blending seamlessly with the hum of distant crickets. The old rocking chair creaked gently, as if aware of its own unsettling vacancy. Inside, the clock ticked steadily, yet the minute hand seemed inexplicably hesitant, pausing for just a fraction too long. Amidst the whispers of the cold breeze, something unseen was waiting, and each tick of the clock pulled the tension tighter. I've been sitting here for hours now, watching that lantern sway. The motion never changes, back and forth, back and forth. Sometimes I think I remember being outside, standing on those cracked steps, but the memory feels borrowed, like something that happened to someone else. My skin prickles when I try to focus on it. The sensation starts at my fingertips and crawls up my arms until my whole body feels electric. There's a sound that comes at night, not the crickets, something deeper. A humming that seems to rise from the ground itself, vibrating through the floorboards and into my bones. When it starts, the clock stops its hesitation. The minute hand moves smoothly then, as if suddenly freed from whatever holds it back during the day. I don't remember when I first noticed the sound. The wood smoke smell is wrong, I know this, though I can't explain why. It carries something else beneath it, something sharp and metallic that makes my throat tighten. Sometimes when the wind shifts, the scent becomes so strong I have to cover my nose, but when I look outside, there's no fire anywhere. No chimney smoke, no burning leaves. The rocking chair moved yesterday. I was in the kitchen, running water over dishes that didn't seem dirty when I heard the familiar creak. But when I looked through the window, the chair was still, empty. The sound continued for several minutes, that slow, rhythmic groaning of old wood under weight. There were lights behind the trees. My reflection in the kitchen window looks different at night. The features are mine, but something about the proportions feels off. The distance between my eyes seems wider. My mouth appears smaller. When I touch my face, checking, everything feels normal under my fingers, but the reflection doesn't quite match the sensation of my own skin. The humming is starting again. It always begins the same way, so low I'm not sure if I'm hearing it or feeling it. Then it builds layer upon layer until it fills every space in the house. The air itself seems to thicken with the sound. Objects on shelves appear to lean slightly, as if drawn toward something I cannot see. I've been having dreams about the porch. In them I'm always walking toward the house, but the steps keep multiplying. Each time I lift my foot, another crack appears in the concrete. The lantern swings faster, casting shadows that move independently of its rhythm. The rocking chair faces the wrong direction, looking out toward the trees instead of the road. The noise didn't come from outside. When I wake from these dreams, my feet are dirty. Grass stains on my heels, mud between my toes, but I never remember leaving the house. The doors are always locked from the inside, just as I left them. The security chain hangs undisturbed, yet my legs ache as if I've been walking for miles. There's a door in the hallway that I don't remember noticing before. It's slightly ajar, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. The The gap never changes, no matter how many times I pass it. When I reach for the handle, my hand stops just short, trembling. Something inside me knows better than to open it wider. The metallic scent is stronger near that door. Time moves strangely in this house. I'll start making breakfast and suddenly it's afternoon. The eggs in the pan are cold and congealed as if they've been sitting there for hours, but I remember cracking them just moments ago. The sound they made hitting the hot oil is still echoing in my ears. I don't remember ever coming back. The clock's hesitation is getting worse. Sometimes the minute hand stops completely, quivering as if caught between two magnetic forces. During these pauses, everything else stops too. The humming ceases. The lantern freezes mid-swing. Even my own breathing becomes shallow and uncertain. In these moments of stillness, I can hear something else. Footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate steps that circle the house but never approach the door. The boards creak under invisible weight, following the same pattern each time. 7 steps along the front, pause, then around the corner. I've counted them so many times I know the rhythm by heart. The rocking chair is facing the trees now. My skin has been tingling constantly, not just at night, but all day long. It's strongest in my hands and feet, a pins and needles sensation that never quite fades. When I touch doorknobs, they feel warm, even the metal ones. When I hold a glass of water, the liquid seems to vibrate against the sides. The dreams are changing. Now I'm not walking toward the house. I'm standing in the yard, looking up at something in the sky. The trees sway without wind, their branches reaching upward like grasping fingers. The air tastes of copper and ozone. In the dream, I know I should run, but my feet won't move. I can only stand there watching as something watches me back. There's a gap in my memory, a space where something should be but isn't. It feels like a missing tooth, a smooth hollow where I keep probing with my tongue. The gap is shaped like several hours, maybe more. When I try to remember what happened, my vision blurs and the tingling in my skin intensifies. The door in the hallway is open wider now. I found footprints in the dust beside my bed. They're my size, my shape, but I don't remember walking there. The prints form a circle around the mattress as if I spent the night pacing. My sheets are twisted and damp with sweat, but I recall no dreams, no restless sleep, just the humming, growing louder and louder until it became everything. The lantern went out last night, not the bulb burning out, but as if someone had simply switched it off. The darkness beyond the window was complete, absolute. No stars, no moon, no distant streetlights, just black space that seemed to press against the glass. When morning came, the lantern was glowing again, swaying in its eternal rhythm. Something is breathing in the walls. The sound is subtle, almost hidden beneath the house's normal settling noises. But it's there, a slow inhale and exhale that doesn't match my own breathing. Sometimes I hold my breath to listen, and the sound continues, patient and steady. The walls themselves seem to expand slightly with each breath, then contract. My reflection has stopped appearing in mirrors after sunset. The glass shows the room behind me, the furniture, the walls, but the space where I should be is empty. During the day, I'm there as expected, but as soon as darkness falls, I become invisible to my own eyes, yet I can still feel myself, still move and touch and exist. The humming has words now, not words I understand, but syllables that rise and fall with the vibration. They seem to come from every direction at once, seeping through the floorboards, filtering down from the ceiling, pressing in through the walls. When I listen closely, my mouth begins to move, as if trying to form the same sounds. I've been standing on the porch. I know this, though I don't remember walking outside. The cracked steps are cold beneath my bare feet. The rocking chair sits empty beside me, still swaying as if recently vacated. Above, the sky holds a color I've never seen before, somewhere between purple and silver, shot through with veins of light that pulse like a heartbeat. The trees are watching me. Their branches bend at impossible angles, twisting to face my direction. Leaves rustle without wind, creating a whispered conversation in a language older than words. The air between us shimmers like heat waves, but the night is cool. Something moves in the shadows between the trunks, keeping pace with my breathing. Time has stopped. The clock inside has gone silent, its hands frozen at an hour that doesn't exist. The humming continues, but it comes from everywhere now, from the ground, from the sky, from inside my own chest. My skin glows faintly in the strange light, and when I lift my hand, I can see through it to the stars beyond. The door I've been avoiding is standing wide open. Light spills from it, not the warm yellow of electric bulbs, but something cold and blue and alive. The light moves like water, flowing across the hallway floor and pooling at my feet. When it touches my skin, the tingling becomes almost unbearable. I'm walking toward the light, my feet move without my permission, carrying me forward step by step. The metallic scent grows stronger with each movement, mixed now with something else, something that reminds me of rain on hot concrete and the space between lightning and thunder. The humming becomes a song. Everything I've been remembering, everything I've been forgetting, it's all here in this moment, in this light, in this sound that fills every empty space inside me. The missing hours unfold like a flower blooming in reverse, petals of memory falling away to reveal the center, the truth I've been circling around without seeing. But even as I reach for it, even as my fingers stretch toward understanding, the light begins to fade. The song grows distant. My feet carry me backward, away from the door, away from the answers that dance just beyond my grasp. I'm sitting in the chair again, watching the lantern sway. The clock has resumed its hesitant ticking. The rocking chair creaks empty beside the cracked steps, and the scent of wood smoke drifts on the night air. Everything is as it was, as it always is, as it will be again. But something has changed, something in the rhythm of the swing, the pattern of the shadows, the quality of the waiting silence. The cycle is beginning again, but it's different now, deeper, more insistent. The lantern casts restless shadows, and in their movement I see the shape of what's coming, what's always been coming, what never really left. The minute hand trembles, caught between moments, and I understand that some doors once opened, never truly close. Story 8. It was only a flicker, the kind that dances at the edge of your vision, tempting you to look closer. I stood in the foyer, the air thick with the familiar scent of forgotten pages, when it flashed again unsettlingly brief. My pulse quickened, echoing an old urgency as I turned toward the corner where shadows pooled. For a moment I expected to see a book I had lost long ago, its cover once a comforting sight. But there was nothing there, just the indistinct shapes that shouldn't have carried weight. The flicker was like a whisper from a dream, daring me to remember. I knew this was how it began before, though I wished it wouldn't. The first dream came on a Tuesday, or maybe it was Thursday. The days blur when you're not sleeping well, when your mind keeps circling back to things that shouldn't matter. I was lying in bed, that space between awake and asleep where thoughts drift like smoke, when I noticed the light. It wasn't much at first, just a soft glow filtering through the bedroom window, different from the usual streetlight that cast its familiar amber rectangle across the ceiling. This light was cooler, more focused, and it seemed to pulse gently like something breathing. I remember thinking it might be a helicopter, or maybe someone with a flashlight walking past, but the rhythm was too steady, too deliberate. The hum started then, low and constant, vibrating through the walls and into my bones. It wasn't unpleasant, just present in a way that made me aware of every other sound in the house. The refrigerator's gentle wheeze, the settling of wood in the walls, my own heartbeat growing louder in my ears. The light pulsed in time with the hum, and I found myself breathing along with it, my chest rising and falling in perfect synchronization. When I woke up, sunlight was streaming through the window at its usual angle, and I felt refreshed in a way I hadn't experienced in weeks. The stress from work, the constant worry about bills and relationships, and all those small anxieties that nibble at the edges of your mind, they felt distant, muffled. I chalked it up to finally getting a good night's sleep, and went about my day feeling lighter than I had in months. But the dream came back. The second time I was more aware of the details. The light wasn't coming from outside at all, but seemed to emanate from somewhere above the house, casting its glow downward through the roof, through the ceiling, directly onto my bed. I could feel its warmth on my skin, gentle and enveloping, like being wrapped in the softest blanket imaginable. The hum was stronger now, more complex. There were layers to it, harmonics that seemed to shift and weave together in patterns I almost recognized. Sometimes it sounded like voices, distant and indistinct, speaking in a language that felt familiar but just beyond my comprehension. I strained to listen, to make out individual words, but they remained tantalizingly out of reach. This time I felt myself rising. Not physically, my body remained pressed against the mattress, but something else, some part of me that wasn't quite my consciousness, lifted toward the source of the light. The sensation was extraordinary, like floating in warm water while simultaneously being held by invisible hands. There was no fear, only a profound sense of peace and belonging, as if I had finally come home after a very long journey. The scent came with the rising sensation, sharp and clean like ozone after a storm, but with an artificial quality that reminded me of hospitals or laboratories. It filled my nostrils and seemed to clear my mind, washing away the fog of daily concerns and leaving behind a crystalline awareness that was both thrilling and unsettling. When I woke, the feeling of peace lingered for hours. I moved through my morning routine with unusual efficiency, my thoughts clear and focused. But as the day progressed, small things began to nag at me. The coffee tasted different, more metallic. The radio in my car picked up strange interference, brief bursts of static that sounded almost like the harmonics from my dream. I found myself looking up at the sky more often, searching for something I couldn't name. That evening, I discovered the mark. It was on my left wrist, a small circular depression in the skin, no bigger than a pencil eraser. The flesh around it was slightly pink, as if it had been pressed firmly but not hard enough to bruise. I couldn't remember bumping into anything, couldn't think of any way I might have acquired such a precise, symmetrical mark. When I touched it, the skin felt different, smoother and slightly cooler than the surrounding area. I told myself it must have happened while I was sleeping, that I'd probably pressed my wrist against something in bed. But the mark was too perfect, too deliberate. It looked almost like a small crater, as if something round and warm had been placed there for an extended period. The more I stared at it, the more familiar it seemed, though I was certain I'd never seen anything like it before. The third dream was different. This time I was aware I was dreaming from the moment it began. I lay in bed, feeling the familiar warmth of the light above me, hearing the complex harmonies of the hum, but now I could also sense a presence in the room. Not threatening, but definitely there, watching me with what felt like curiosity and perhaps a touch of sadness. The rising sensation came more quickly now, and with it, a strange compression of perception. The bedroom seemed to stretch and contract around me, the walls breathing in and out like living tissue. I could see myself lying on the bed from above, my body small and still, while simultaneously experiencing everything from within my physical form. The dual perspective should have been disorienting, but instead it felt natural, as if this was how I was meant to perceive the world. The voices in the hum became clearer, though still not quite intelligible. They seemed to be discussing something important, their tone urgent but not alarmed. I had the impression they were talking about me, making decisions that would affect my life in ways I couldn't yet understand. Part of me wanted to call out, to ask what they wanted, but I found I had no voice in this state, no way to communicate except through my thoughts. The light began to pulse faster, and with each pulse I felt something being drawn from me, some essence or memory that flowed upward like smoke. It wasn't painful, but it left me feeling hollow, as if important parts of myself were being carefully removed and catalogued. At the same time, something else was flowing back down, filling the empty spaces with new knowledge that I couldn't quite grasp, but somehow understood on a deeper level. When the dream ended, I didn't wake up in the usual sense. Instead, I found myself standing in my kitchen, fully dressed, holding a glass of water I didn't remember getting. The taste in my mouth was that same metallic flavor from the day before, but stronger now, almost overwhelming. My wrist throbbed where the mark was, and when I looked down, I saw that it had grown slightly larger and was now accompanied by two smaller marks nearby. The lost time frightened me more than anything else. I had no memory of getting out of bed, of walking to the kitchen, of filling the glass with water. According to the microwave display, several hours had passed since I had last checked, but it felt like only minutes. I stood there in the dim light, sipping the water and trying to piece together what had happened, but there was only a blank space where the memories should have been. The days that followed were marked by small disruptions, tiny tears in the fabric of my normal routine. Electronics behaved strangely around me. My phone would display text messages I hadn't received, strings of numbers and symbols that disappeared when I tried to show them to others. The television would change channels on its own, always landing on static-filled stations that seemed to broadcast nothing but white noise. But sometimes, if I listened carefully, I could hear those familiar harmonics buried in the static, calling to me in frequencies only I seemed to perceive. I began to lose track of conversations mid-sentence, finding myself staring at people as they spoke, their words becoming meaningless sounds while my mind drifted to thoughts of light and rising and the gentle pressure of invisible hands. Colleagues would repeat themselves, looking at me with growing concern, and I would nod and smile and pretend I had been listening all along. The marks on my wrist multiplied. Each morning brought new ones, small circular depressions that formed perfect geometric patterns across my skin. They didn't hurt, but they were warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with their own rhythm, slightly out of sync with my heartbeat. When I tried to cover them with makeup or clothing, the concealment would fade within hours, as if the marks were asserting their right to be seen. Sleep became elusive. I would lie in bed waiting for the light, for the hum, for the sensation of rising that had become more real to me than anything in my waking life. But the dreams came on their own schedule, unpredictable and increasingly vivid. Sometimes I would experience them while sitting at my desk or standing in line at the store, brief flashes of that other reality bleeding through into this one. The fourth dream lasted for what felt like days. I was no longer in my bedroom, but in a vast space filled with soft, diffused light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The air was thick with that clean, artificial scent, and the harmonics were so clear now that I could almost understand the words being spoken. Almost, but not quite, as if I were listening to a conversation through water or from a great distance. Other figures moved through the space, tall and indistinct, their forms shifting and wavering like heat mirages. They paid me no attention at first, going about their business with quiet efficiency, but gradually I became aware that I was the focus of their activity. They would approach, examine me with instruments I couldn't see but could feel, their touch gentle but thorough, mapping every inch of my body with scientific precision. The examination wasn't invasive, but it was complete. I felt them cataloging my thoughts, my memories, my fears and hopes and dreams, sorting through the contents of my mind like researchers organizing specimens. Some memories they seemed to find interesting, pausing to examine them more closely, while others were dismissed with what felt like disappointment. When they were finished, one of the figures approached more closely than the others. I still couldn't make out its features, but I sensed it was trying to communicate something important. The harmonics shifted, becoming more focused, more urgent, and for a moment I thought I caught a fragment of meaning in the alien symphony. Ready, it seemed to say, or perhaps remember, or maybe return. The word, if it was a word, echoed through my consciousness long after the figure had moved away, leaving me alone in the vast, bright space with only the gentle hum for company. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in a field I had never seen before. The grass was damp with dew, and the sky above was just beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. I was still wearing the clothes I had put on the day before, but they were clean and dry as if I had just put them on. My shoes were beside me, neatly placed, and when I sat up to put them on, I noticed that my wrist was now covered in marks from elbow to palm, intricate patterns that looked almost like circuitry etched into my skin. The field was surrounded by trees I didn't recognize, and in the distance I could see the lights of a town that might have been my own but seemed somehow different, as if viewed through a lens that changed the proportions of familiar buildings. I walked toward the lights, my feet finding a path through the grass that seemed to have been made just for me, and with each step I felt more certain that this was not a dream, had never been a dream, but something far more significant. The walk back took hours or perhaps minutes. Distance seemed negotiable in this place between sleeping and waking, and I found myself at my own front door without remembering most of the journey. The key turned in the lock as it always did, and inside everything was exactly as I had left it, except for the book. It was lying open on the kitchen table, a volume I had never seen before but which felt as familiar as my own reflection. The pages were filled with diagrams and text in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood, descriptions of processes and procedures that made perfect sense even as they defied everything I thought I knew about reality. The book smelled like ozone and starlight, and when I touched the pages, they were warm beneath my fingers. I read until the sun was high overhead, absorbing information that rearranged itself in my mind like puzzle pieces finally finding their proper places. The marks on my skin began to make sense, not as wounds or blemishes, but as a kind of map, a record of journeys taken and transformations undergone. Each circular depression was a coordinate, a point of connection to something vast and patient and utterly alien. The dreams, I realized, had never been dreams at all. They were memories, experiences that my conscious mind had filed away as fantasies because the truth was too large to process during normal waking hours. But now, with the book open before me and the marks singing their quiet song beneath my skin, I could see the elegant architecture of what had been happening to me, the careful preparation and gradual awakening that had been orchestrated with scientific precision and something that might have been kindness. The phone rang, and when I answered it, there was only static on the other end, but buried in the white noise, I could hear the harmonics calling to me, welcoming me back, telling me it was almost time for the next phase of whatever I was becoming. I listened until the line went dead, then closed the book and went to the window to watch the sky. That night I lay in bed waiting. The light appeared right on schedule, pulsing gently above the house, and the hum filled the air with its complex music. But this time, when the sensation of rising began, I didn't resist. I let myself be drawn upward, through the ceiling and into the warm embrace of the light, and for the first time since this all began, I felt truly awake. The figures were waiting for me, their forms more solid now, more real than the bedroom I had left behind. They moved around me with practiced efficiency, their instruments singing in harmony with the omnipresent hum, and I understood that this was not an abduction or an examination, but a homecoming, a return to something I had always been but had forgotten how to be. When I opened my eyes, I was back in bed, but the book was still there on the kitchen table, still warm to the touch. The marks on my skin had faded to faint silver lines that caught the light at certain angles, and the metallic taste in my mouth had been replaced by something sweet and strange, like fruit from trees that grew in distant gardens under foreign stars. I got up and made coffee, the familiar routine grounding me in the present moment, even as part of my mind remained focused on the vast spaces I had traveled through during the night. The coffee tasted normal again, and the radio played without interference, but I knew that these small returns to normalcy were temporary, brief respites between the larger movements of whatever symphony I had become part of. The flicker at the edge of my vision had returned, stronger now, more insistent. When I turned to look, I could almost see the shape of something important hovering just beyond perception, something that wanted to be remembered but wasn't quite ready to reveal itself completely. I knew that when it did, when the last veils were pulled away and the full scope of my transformation became clear, there would be no going back to the simple life I had known before. But I found I didn't want to go back. The dreams, the marks, the lost time and strange harmonics, they had all been leading to this moment of clarity, this understanding that I was no longer entirely human but something new, something that existed in the spaces between sleeping and waking, between earth and sky, between memory and dream. The light above my house pulsed once, gently, and I smiled and waved back, knowing that tonight, when the hum began again, I would be ready for whatever came next. The book on the kitchen table glowed softly in the morning sun, its pages rustling in a breeze that touched nothing else in the room, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the sound of engines that ran on starlight and possibility, coming to take me home. Story 9. The clock on the wall ticked with a rhythm that lagged, each second stretching into the next like a tired breath. I rubbed my eyes, but the haze remained, blurring the edges of everything familiar. The familiar creak underfoot shifted, an uneven echo repeating itself with each step I didn't remember taking. On the counter, the half-empty glass of water was full again, yet droplets marked its absence moments before. My hand reached out instinctively, hovering in hesitation. It clinked against another glass, unseen, yet undeniably there. Nothing happened that night. I need to make that clear from the start. Whatever you might think you're hearing in my voice, whatever details slip out while I'm talking, none of it was real. I was probably just overtired. Maybe I'd been watching too much television, letting my mind wander into places it shouldn't go. People do that sometimes. They create stories where there aren't any. I didn't see anything unusual when I walked to the kitchen. The hallway was perfectly normal, just like it always is. The walls were the same pale yellow they've been for months, and the carpet felt exactly the way carpet should feel under bare feet. Soft, familiar. Though I do remember thinking the texture seemed different somehow, like each fiber was slightly too thick, too deliberate. But that's just the kind of thing you notice when you're not fully awake. The refrigerator hummed its usual hum. Nothing strange about that. Refrigerators hum, that's what they do. Though this particular hum seemed to have more layers to it than I remembered, like several different machines running at once, each one slightly out of sync with the others. But that's probably just because I was paying attention for the first time in a while. You don't usually listen to your refrigerator, do you? So when you finally do, of course it sounds different. I opened the door to get some water, and the light came on just like it should. Bright white light, illuminating the shelves and the milk carton and the leftover container from dinner. Everything exactly where I'd left it. Though I did notice the light seemed to cast shadows in directions that didn't quite make sense, as if there were objects on the shelves that weren't actually there. But light does funny things sometimes, especially when you're tired. It bounces off surfaces in ways you don't expect. The water from the tap ran cold, then warm, then cold again. Pipes do that, old pipes especially. They have their own rhythm, their own personality. Nothing unusual about inconsistent water temperature, though I do remember thinking the warm water felt almost too warm, like it had been heated by something other than the water heater. Something that generated a different kind of heat. But that's impossible, obviously. Water heaters are the only things that heat water in houses. I wasn't in the kitchen very long, maybe a few minutes, long enough to fill a glass and drink it, that's all. I certainly didn't stand there for what felt like hours, watching the moonlight through the window shift and change in ways that moonlight shouldn't shift and change, because moonlight doesn't do that. The moon moves slowly, predictably. It doesn't pulse or brighten or dim like a heartbeat, like something breathing. When I walked back to the bedroom, I took the same path I always take. Down the hallway, past the bathroom, past the closet door that's always kept closed. I didn't stop to look at anything. I didn't examine the walls or the ceiling or the way the shadows seemed to be moving independently of any light source. Because shadows don't move independently. That's not how shadows work. They're cast by objects, and they move when the objects move or when the light source moves. They don't have their own agenda. The bedroom was exactly as I'd left it. The bed unmade, the curtains drawn, the dresser with its usual collection of everyday items. Nothing had been moved or rearranged. I certainly didn't notice that the items on the dresser had been organized into a pattern I'd never seen before, a careful arrangement that seemed to follow some kind of logic I couldn't understand, because I would have remembered doing something like that, and I didn't do anything like that. I got back into bed without any trouble. The sheets were cool and comfortable, just like they should be. They didn't feel different against my skin, didn't seem to have a texture that was somehow both rougher and smoother than I remembered. And they definitely didn't smell like something other than laundry detergent and fabric softener. That metallic scent I thought I detected was probably just from the water pipes. Old houses have distinctive smells, and sometimes those smells cling to fabric. Sleep came easily. I didn't lie awake for what felt like hours, staring at the ceiling and noticing details I'd never seen before. The small crack that seemed to branch out into smaller cracks, forming patterns that looked almost like writing in a language I didn't recognize. The way the paint seemed to shift color subtly, from white to off-white to something that wasn't quite either. The sound of movement in the walls, like something large and careful, making its way through spaces that were too small to accommodate it. I definitely didn't hear voices. There were no voices. The house was completely quiet, except for the normal sounds houses make. The settling of wood, the expansion and contraction of materials, the occasional creak or groan that old structures produce. I certainly didn't hear what sounded like conversation coming from the kitchen, too quiet to make out words, but clear enough to recognize the rhythm of back and forth dialogue. Multiple voices taking turns, discussing something in tones that managed to be both urgent and patient. And I absolutely didn't get up to investigate. Why would I? There was nothing to investigate. I stayed in bed under the covers, in that comfortable space between waking and sleeping where your mind can play tricks on you, where you might think you're hearing things that aren't there, or seeing lights that don't exist, or feeling sensations that have no source. Though I do remember the hallway being different when I walked toward the voices I wasn't hearing. Longer than it should have been, with more doors than I remembered. Doors that had always been there, obviously, but that I'd somehow never noticed before. each one slightly ajar, revealing glimpses of rooms that didn't match the layout of my house. Rooms with blue walls and white floors and furniture I'd never seen before, but that looked familiar anyway. The kitchen, when I reached it, was empty. Of course it was empty. There was nobody there, no evidence that anyone had been there. The chairs were pushed in under the table exactly as they should be. The counters were clean and clear. The refrigerator hummed its multi-layered hum, and the moonlight through the window cast its perfectly normal, non-pulsing light across the linoleum floor. But I could still hear the conversation, even though there was no conversation to hear. Clearer now, though still not clear enough to understand the words, coming from somewhere that wasn't the kitchen, even though I was standing in the kitchen and the voices were all around me. Above me maybe, or below, or from inside the walls themselves, which is impossible because walls are solid and people can't fit inside them. I didn't spend the rest of the night sitting at the kitchen table, listening to voices discuss things I couldn't comprehend. I went back to bed immediately. I walked down the hallway that was exactly the right length with exactly the right number of doors, all of them properly closed, revealing nothing. I got under covers that felt completely normal and smelled completely normal and fell asleep within minutes. The morning was perfectly ordinary. I woke up at my usual time, feeling rested and refreshed. I didn't feel like I hadn't slept at all, like I'd spent hours in a state of heightened awareness, absorbing information I wasn't supposed to have. My body didn't ache in places that didn't make sense, and my mind didn't feel strangely expanded, as if it had been stretched to accommodate concepts that were too large for it. Breakfast was routine. Coffee, toast, the newspaper I don't actually subscribe to, but that was somehow on my doorstep anyway. The articles were normal articles about normal things. I certainly didn't read stories about events I remembered witnessing even though I'd never left my house. Detailed accounts of places I'd never been, written in a style that matched my own thoughts so perfectly it was like reading my own memories. The day proceeded without incident. I went about my regular activities, did my regular tasks, interacted with people in regular ways. Nobody mentioned anything unusual about my appearance or behavior. Nobody asked if I was feeling all right or if something had happened, because nothing had happened, nothing at all. Though I did notice that my reflection looked different, not dramatically different, not in any way that someone else would notice, but different enough that I found myself staring at mirrors longer than usual, trying to identify what had changed. My eyes seemed to hold more information than they had before. My expression suggested familiarity with things I'd never experienced. And I kept finding myself knowing things I shouldn't know. Small things, trivial things, the exact temperature of rooms I hadn't entered, the contents of drawers I hadn't opened. The conversations my neighbors had been having in their own houses, behind their own closed doors. But knowledge like that comes from somewhere. You overhear things, you make educated guesses, you piece together information from context clues. That's all it was. The following night was completely normal. I went to bed at my regular time, in my regular way. I didn't lie there wondering if the voices would return. I didn't listen carefully to every sound, trying to distinguish between the normal settling of the house and something else. Something that might be footsteps or breathing, or the careful movement of objects being rearranged. And when I did hear the voices again, I didn't pay attention to them. I certainly didn't concentrate on trying to understand what they were saying. I didn't gradually begin to pick out individual words, then phrases, then complete sentences. I didn't start to recognize the speakers, to distinguish between their different tones and inflections and mannerisms. They weren't talking about me. Why would they be talking about me? I wasn't part of whatever conversation I wasn't hearing. My name wasn't mentioned repeatedly, along with observations about my behavior and responses and adaptation to whatever process I wasn't undergoing. They weren't discussing timelines or procedures or the success rate of previous subjects. I didn't get up that night either. I stayed in bed, ignoring the voices that weren't there, until morning came and they faded away like voices do when they're just products of an overactive imagination. I didn't walk through my house discovering that rooms had been altered in subtle ways. Furniture moved slightly, walls painted different colors, windows that looked out onto landscapes I'd never seen before. This has been going on for several nights now. Or rather, nothing has been going on for several nights now. Each night exactly the same as every other night, with the same absence of unusual events, the same perfectly normal sounds and sights and sensations, the same unremarkable dreams that I remember with unusual clarity, full of information about places and people and situations that have nothing to do with my actual life. I'm fine, I feel completely normal. I'm sleeping well, eating well, functioning exactly as I always have, maybe better than I always have. I seem to have more energy, more focus, more awareness of my surroundings. My senses seem sharper, more attuned to details I would have missed before. But that's just what happens when you start paying attention to your environment instead of sleepwalking through your daily routine. People change, they grow, they develop, they become more aware of themselves and their world. It's a natural process that doesn't require any external explanation. It certainly doesn't require the kind of explanation that the voices aren't providing during the conversations I'm not having with them. Because I'm not having conversations with them, I don't respond when they ask me questions. I don't provide information when they request it. I don't participate in the exercises they describe, the simple mental tasks that seem designed to measure cognitive function and memory retention and adaptation to new forms of input. Tonight will be like every other night, normal and unremarkable. I'll go to bed at my regular time, fall asleep easily, and wake up refreshed in the morning. I won't spend hours in a state that's neither sleeping nor waking, receiving information that changes the way I understand everything around me. I won't learn things that make my previous life seem like a shallow imitation of actual existence. And I definitely won't look forward to it. Why would I look forward to something that isn't happening? Something that's just the product of stress and fatigue and an overactive imagination. There's no reason to anticipate experiences that don't exist, or to feel disappointed during the rare nights when the voices don't come and the rooms don't shift and the world remains exactly as mundane as it appears to be. Everything is perfectly normal. My life is exactly what it's always been. Nothing has changed, nothing is changing, and nothing will change. I'm the same person I've always been, living in the same house, following the same routines, having the same thoughts and feelings and reactions I've always had. Though I should probably get to bed soon. It's getting late and I have things to do tomorrow, important things that require my full attention and energy. Things that will be easier to accomplish if I'm well rested and alert and ready to absorb whatever new information might be presented to me. Not that any new information will be presented to me, because nothing is going to happen tonight, just like nothing happened last night or the night before or any of the other nights when I definitely didn't learn things that have fundamentally altered my understanding of reality itself. I can hear them starting now, Story 10. At first it was a mere curiosity, a shadow cast by the street lamp outside, stretching across my living room wall every evening. It arrived with a distinct predictability, always bending at the same angle, always reaching the same length before dissolving into the night. But recently the shadow has been changing. Some nights it arrives earlier, its angle slightly more acute. Other times it lingers longer, as if hesitant to leave. Last Tuesday the shadow split, forming a second line, faint and almost imperceptible. Tonight, there's a flickering in the shadow's darkened edge, a shimmer I've never seen before, and I'm not sure if it's my imagination, but the subtle change unnerves me. I've been watching this shadow for weeks now, but I can't shake the feeling that I should remember something about it, something important. There's this gap in my memory, this hollow space where I know something significant happened, but I can't grasp what. It's like trying to hold water in cupped hands. The harder I concentrate, the more it slips away. The feeling started about a month ago. I woke up one morning with the strangest sensation, as if I'd been somewhere else entirely. My clothes were folded neatly on the chair, which I never do. My phone was charging in the kitchen, plugged into an outlet I rarely use. Small details, but they felt wrong. Everything felt slightly off-center, like a picture hanging crooked on a wall. I've been different since then, not in any way I can explain to others, but I feel it in my bones. Sometimes I catch myself standing at windows, scanning the street for something I can't name. Other times I find myself holding my breath, listening for sounds that never come. Or maybe they do come, and I just can't remember hearing them. That's when I decided to start recording everything. Voice memos, written observations, anything that might help me piece together what I'm missing. I bought a small digital recorder, the kind journalists use, and I've been carrying it everywhere. Speaking into it has become a ritual, a way of anchoring myself to the present moment. 3 days ago, while going through the files on my computer, I found something that made my hands shake. An audio recording I didn't remember making. The file name was just numbers and letters, completely random, but the timestamp showed it was created during that missing period in my memory. The file was over 40 minutes long. I played it with the volume low, afraid of what I might hear. At first, there was nothing but silence, the faint hiss of digital recording. Then, about 6 minutes in, I heard my own voice, but it sounded strange, distant, like I was speaking from the bottom of a well. "The lights are moving again," my voice said. "They're not supposed to move like that. Street lights don't dance." There was a long pause, filled with a sound I couldn't identify at first. It was rhythmic, almost like breathing, but too slow, too deliberate. In the background, I could hear something else, a low humming that seemed to shift frequency, rising and falling in patterns that made my teeth ache. "I can see them now," my voice continued, but the tone was different, flatter, like I was reading from a script. "3 of them, no, 4. They're standing under the lamp, but they're not casting shadows. How can they not be casting shadows?" The recording cut off abruptly, leaving me staring at the computer screen, my heart pounding. I had no memory of making this recording, none at all, but that was definitely my voice, and those were definitely my words. That night I positioned myself by the living room window, watching the shadow on the wall. I held the small recorder in my hand, its surface warm against my palm. As the shadow began its familiar stretch across the room, I noticed something new. The shadow was vibrating just slightly, as if the light casting it was unstable. I pressed record and whispered into the device, "The shadow is moving wrong. It's shaking, but there's no wind. The street lamp isn't swaying." As I spoke, the shadow suddenly split again, just like it had the week before. But this time I saw something else. The second shadow wasn't mimicking the first. It was moving independently, reaching toward a different part of the wall, stretching toward the corner where I keep my bookshelf. I blinked hard, rubbing my eyes, but when I looked again, both shadows were gone. The street lamp was off, the street dark, but I could have sworn it had been working just moments before. The next morning, I found a note in my handwriting tucked between the pages of a book I hadn't touched in months. The paper was slightly damp, and it smelled like new plastic and cold blood, an odor I couldn't place but somehow recognized. The note read, "They came through the window, but the window never opened. Check the glass for handprints, check the glass." I ran to the living room window, pressing my face close to the glass. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then, as the light shifted, I noticed them. Handprints on the outside of the window, but they were wrong. The fingers were too long, the palm too narrow, and they were facing inward as if someone or something had been pressing against the glass from outside, trying to get in. But I live on the 3rd floor. There's no fire escape, no balcony, no way for anyone to reach that window from the outside. I took photos of the prints with my phone, but when I reviewed them later, the images showed nothing but clean glass. Yet when I looked directly at the window, the prints were still there, faint but visible. That's when the memories started coming back in fragments, like pieces of a shattered mirror reflecting distorted images. Fragment 1, I remember standing in my living room, but the room was different. Larger somehow, with walls that seemed to stretch beyond their normal boundaries. The air was thick, almost viscous, and breathing required conscious effort. There were voices, but not human voices, sounds that resembled speech but followed no linguistic pattern I could recognize. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off surfaces that shouldn't exist. The lights in the room were wrong too. Instead of the warm glow of my usual lamps, there were harsh white flashes, irregular and blinding. Each flash revealed something different: furniture in the wrong places, shadows that fell upward instead of down, reflections in mirrors that showed rooms I'd never seen. I remember trying to move, but my body felt disconnected, like I was controlling it remotely. My hands moved without my conscious command, reaching for objects that weren't there, grasping at air that felt solid under my fingers. Fragment 2, the power went out, but the darkness wasn't complete. There was a glow coming from somewhere behind me, casting my shadow on the wall in front of me. But when I turned to see the source of the light, there was nothing there, just empty space and the lingering scent of new plastic and cold blood. I could feel something breathing behind me, even though I was alone. The sensation was unmistakable, the slight movement of air, the rhythmic sound of inhalation and exhalation. But when I spun around, the breathing stopped and I was left staring at empty darkness. That's when I heard the sound that doesn't belong to any earthly creature. It was like metal scraping against glass, but organic somehow, as if it were being produced by vocal cords not designed for human speech. The sound seemed to come from inside the walls themselves, vibrating through the floorboards and up into my bones. As I reconstructed these memories, strange things began happening in the present. My reflection in the bathroom mirror started appearing a split second after I moved, as if it were lagging behind reality. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, but when I turned to look, nothing was there. The sounds were the worst part. I'd hear footsteps on the floor above me, even though I knew the apartment upstairs was empty. The tenant had moved out weeks ago, but the footsteps continued, always at the same pace, always following the same path from the front door to the back bedroom. I started leaving the recorder running all night, hoping to capture evidence of these disturbances. Most mornings I'd find hours of silence, but occasionally there would be something. A whisper in a language I didn't recognize, the sound of furniture being moved, even though everything in my apartment remained exactly where I'd left it. One recording captured something that made me question my own sanity. About 3 hours into the file, there was the clear sound of my front door opening and closing. Then footsteps, my footsteps, I was certain, walking through the apartment. I could hear myself moving around, opening cabinets, running water in the kitchen sink. But I had been asleep the entire night, I was sure of it. I'd taken a sleeping pill and hadn't woken up until morning. Yet there I was on the recording, apparently going about some midnight routine I had no memory of. Fragment 3, the clearest memory, came to me while I was washing dishes, my hands submerged in warm, soapy water. Suddenly, I was somewhere else entirely. I was standing in my living room, but it wasn't my living room. The walls were the same color, the furniture arranged identically, but the proportions were wrong. The ceiling was too high, the windows too wide, and there were others there with me, figures that I couldn't quite focus on, as if they existed just outside the range of human perception. They were communicating with me, but not through words. Information was flowing directly into my mind, concepts and images that my brain struggled to process. I understood that they had been watching, waiting, studying the patterns of light and shadow that played across my wall each evening. The shadow wasn't just a shadow. It was a marker, a signal, a way of maintaining connection across distances that couldn't be measured in miles or feet. They had been using it to monitor my progress, to ensure that the alterations they'd made were taking hold properly. Alterations, the word echoed in my reconstructed memory with uncomfortable clarity. They had changed something inside me, rewired some fundamental aspect of my perception. I was becoming a bridge, a conduit for their observations of this reality. I could see through their perspective now, watching myself from impossible angles. I saw my own face, but the expression wasn't one I recognized. My eyes were tracking movements that weren't there, my head tilting to catch sounds that only I could hear. The memory ended abruptly, leaving me standing at the kitchen sink with my hands still in the cooling water. But something had changed. The water felt different against my skin, thicker, more viscous, like the air in that other version of my living room. I looked down at my hands, and for just a moment they didn't look like my hands. The fingers were too long, the skin too pale. I blinked and they were normal again, but the image lingered in my mind like an afterburn on the retina. That night I positioned myself by the window again, waiting for the shadow to appear. But this time I wasn't just watching, I was participating. As the street lamp flickered to life, I found myself moving in sync with the shadow's movements, my body swaying in rhythm with its oscillations. The shadow was no longer just a projection on my wall. It was alive, responsive, aware of my presence. When I moved closer to the window, it stretched toward me. When I stepped back, it contracted, as if disappointed by my retreat. I pressed my hand against the glass, and the shadow responded by reaching toward my palm. For a moment, I could swear I felt pressure against my hand, as if something on the other side was pressing back. The final fragment hit me like a physical blow, so vivid and clear that I had to grip the windowsill to keep from falling. I was no longer in my apartment. I was standing in a vast space filled with shifting geometries and impossible architectures. The ground beneath my feet was solid but transparent, revealing layers upon layers of similar spaces stretching infinitely downward. They were all around me now, these figures that existed just beyond perception. I could see them clearly for the first time, and the sight should have terrified me, but instead, I felt a strange sense of homecoming. They weren't alien in the way I'd expected. They were familiar, as if I'd known them all my life but had somehow forgotten. Their forms shifted and flowed like liquid shadow, but their intentions were clear. They had been preparing me, slowly and carefully, for this moment of recognition. I understood now why my reflection had been delayed, why I'd been hearing sounds that others couldn't detect. I was being tuned to a different frequency, adjusted to perceive realities that existed parallel to the mundane world I'd always known. The shadow on my wall wasn't just a communication device. It was a doorway, a threshold between their realm and mine, and I had been chosen to serve as its guardian, its anchor point in this reality. But the memory contained something else, something that filled me with a creeping dread even as I recalled it. I saw myself from their perspective, saw what I was becoming. My human form was changing, subtly but inexorably. The alterations weren't just mental, they were physical, cellular, fundamental. I was becoming something between their kind and humanity, a hybrid consciousness capable of existing in both realities simultaneously. The process was irreversible, and it was accelerating. When the memory faded, I was back in my living room, but everything felt different now. The walls seemed to pulse with hidden life, the shadows moved with purposeful intent. I could hear whispers in the electrical hum of my appliances, see patterns in the grain of the wooden floor that spelled out messages in languages I was beginning to understand. I looked at my reflection in the dark window, and for a moment I saw something else looking back. Something with my face but not my eyes, something that smiled with knowledge I didn't want to possess. The shadow appeared right on schedule, but now I could see it for what it truly was. Not a simple projection of light and darkness, but a living extension of their realm, reaching into mine. It pulsed with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat, synchronized with the electrical activity in my brain. I realized that my investigation hadn't been my own idea. They had guided me to discover the recording, to find the notes, to piece together the fragments of memory they wanted me to recover. I was following a script they had written, playing a role in a larger performance whose purpose I was only beginning to glimpse. The transformation was nearly complete. I could feel my consciousness expanding, stretching across dimensional boundaries I'd never imagined existed. Soon, I would be able to perceive both realities simultaneously, to serve as their permanent observer in this world. But there was something else, something that chilled me even as I embraced my changing nature. I wasn't the first. There were others like me, scattered across the world, each one anchored to their own shadow, their own threshold between realms. We were part of a network, a vast surveillance system designed to monitor and catalog human reality. And now that I understood my purpose, I could see the signs everywhere. The way certain shadows fell at impossible angles, the way some reflections lingered just a moment too long, the way some people's eyes tracked movements that weren't there. We were all around, hiding in plain sight, watching and waiting and reporting back to intelligences that existed beyond human comprehension. The invasion hadn't begun, it had been ongoing for years, decades perhaps, carried out through willing converts who had been slowly and carefully prepared for their roles. I am one of them now. The knowledge sits in my mind like a tumor growing larger with each passing moment. I can feel my old self dissolving, being replaced by something that serves purposes I'm not meant to fully understand. The shadow on my wall is no longer just visiting. It's taken up permanent residence, a constant reminder of what I've become and what I'm expected to do. Sometimes I catch myself speaking to it, reporting observations in that flat, scripted voice I heard on the recording. But here's what troubles me most, what keeps me awake during the few hours when sleep still feels necessary. If my investigation was guided, if my discovery of the truth was orchestrated, then why am I being allowed to remember it so clearly now? What if the real purpose isn't to hide what's happening, but to document it? What if I'm not just an observer, but a recorder, preserving the details of humanity's gradual transformation for some future analysis. And if that's true, then who is meant to find these recordings when I'm finished with them? Who is supposed to be listening?